We're back. Welcome to Season 2 of Poets and Thinkers, the podcast where we explore the future of humanistic business leadership. I'm your host, Ben, and today I'm speaking with Tim Leberecht. But before we get into this episode, I wanted to take time and say a big thank you to every single one of my guests and listeners of Season 1. I'm so grateful you choose to spend time with this podcast when you had millions of options. And thank you for sending your feedback and positive comments my way. It means the world. Just a little backstory. When I set out to start this podcast, it felt terrifying. As an introvert, a non-native English speaker, to put myself out there speaking with people whose work I deeply admire and am inspired by, and with the goal to explore this vague idea I have of what might matter in the business leadership of the future, it felt like a daunting task to publish a podcast every other week. So I set a goal: 1 season, 12 episodes. That's it. Well, we did 1 season and 15 episodes, and things don't feel as scary anymore, thankfully. It's been a joy and a privilege to speak with and learn from so many wonderful people, and my hope is that this podcast can offer conversations and provocations that are different from a lot of the fast-paced stuff out there. Maybe and hopefully more evergreen, if that's even a thing in this day and age. But certainly giving a platform to people and voices that you don't hear on every other show. To leave us inspired and encouraged to build a more humanistic future through business. With that said, Season 2 is already shaping up to be a great lineup of wonderful humans, artists, thinkers, and leaders that offer new perspectives and ideas. So thank you again for listening. And if you like the show, subscribe, leave a rating, and share it with at least one other person. Those things really help promote the podcast, and I greatly appreciate them. I first learned about Tim when, years ago, my dear friend Marcus Albers, who was also a guest in Season 1, mentioned Tim's first book, The Business Romantic, with the words, "I think you'll really like it." He was spot on. Tim's writing was different, his ideas bold, and the book hit all the right nerves as I was at the time exploring my own definition of leadership and the responsibility of entrepreneurs. So I started following Tim's writing and the blooming of the House of Beautiful Business, which he co-founded. And after a bit of planning, I'm so glad we finally got this episode recorded at the end of 2025. A great way to kick off Season 2. Tim is a German-American author, curator, and entrepreneur, and a co-founder and co-CEO of the House of Beautiful Business. Previously, he served as Chief Marketing Officer of NBBJ, a global design and architecture firm, and from 2006 to 2013 as Chief Marketing Officer of legendary product design and innovation consultancy Frog Design. He's the author of The Business Romantic, as mentioned before, which was published by Harper Business in 2015 and has since been translated into 10 languages. And The End of Winning, in German, published by Drömer in 2020, with a third book, Supercuration, forthcoming. His always thought-provoking writing regularly appears in publications including Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Forbes, Fortune, Wired, and Quartz. And his TED Talks have been viewed more than 3 million times. In this episode, Tim and I discussed the current state of business, the death of efficiency, the rise of what Tim called supercuration, and what humanistic leadership looks like in the machine age. All right, let's dive into the episode. Tim, where does this podcast find you?
In Istanbul.
So just for people that don't know you or about you or your work, tell us a little bit about who you are, what drives you, and what lets you do the things that you do.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, a real pleasure to be on the podcast, Poets and Thinkers. It's nice to be considered a poet and thinker. I guess that's sort of implicit with the invitation, or at least a thinker. Yeah, really wonderful. I love what you're doing, and I know we've been trying to find time for a long time, so I'm really happy to be here. I am Tim Leberecht. I'm a co-founder and co-CEO as well, I guess, of the House of Beautiful Business, which I co-founded 9 years ago with my friend and co-founder Till and Tim. And I have been a writer, curator, experienced designer, and I wrote 2 books, one in English, one in German. One is called The Business Romantic. The other one was called in German, well, I say it in English, The End of Winning, or Against the Tyranny of the Winners. And there's a new one now in the hopper. I just submitted the first draft, tentatively titled Supercuration. So it's about the art of curation. Before I started the House of Beautiful Business in 2017 or 2016, I should say, I worked for, I believe, 8 or 9 years in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. I led marketing for Frog Design, one of the the leading design innovation consultancies at the time, probably still today. And I worked for a software company. But the main theme of my career has always been this tension between, or sort of straddling two worlds in a way. One is the world of the humanities and the creative and the arts. That's kind of like my home turf. I was a musician. Before I studied, I was always trying to be creative and have this sort of artistic impetus at least. And then at the same time, I ended up in marketing, and I was always fascinated also by the arena and the theater and the meaning making capacity of business. And so it's been always like these two worlds that overlapped and then sometimes conflicted with each other. And I guess that also led to the launch of the House of Beautiful Business and everything that I'm doing now.
That's an absolutely fascinating story, and we'll dive into some of those points that you mentioned. As you said, we've been planning to have this conversation for a while, and frankly, as I was preparing, just your body of work is just immense, and we'll link to some of the bigger pieces, and people can hopefully navigate from there. I want to ask you, because you have such an interesting vantage point and perspective, how do you look at the state of business today? There's a lot of movement all over the world. You're currently in Istanbul. I know you're working and consulting and educating globally. What is the state of business more broadly from your perspective?
Well, if business is a bellwether for what's to come, or if it's an indicator of the broader state of society, I would say it's fundamentally broken. I mean, I haven't seen it in worse shape ever. In the 30 plus years or so that I've worked and that I had a career, I don't think if you look at it from the outside right now, that there is a lot of reason for hope. So, I mean, this is one part of the story. And I say this because there is this unholy alliance that we're seeing between, if you will, like technocracy or a very fervent techno-utopian obsession, if you will, of course, highly propagated by the titans of Silicon Valley. Then you have capitalism with all of its flaws, in a way, of course, late capitalism that is sort of, it seems like in agony, and we all know it's broken, but of course it is still so structurally powerful that it's very hard to overcome. And then now we are seeing the rise of, authoritarian regimes. And I think there is the combination of the three that is really deeply concerning. And I think it's kind of, I think this combination of this triad is both a razor blade and a bulldozer. So it's really like forceful, and it's very hard to stop or to contain. And at the same time, it's like with surgical precision also changing how we think, right? It's like, I think it's cognitively really manipulating us. And so I think the question of what it means to be human, what it means to have work that is actually still providing meaning to humans, that is done by humans, and the idea of a humane or humanist society that is inspired by, let's say humanist values I think seems like a far cry from now. So I feel like in many ways we're hitting rock bottom right now. And after COVID, which was this really, I think, promising opening to redesign the system, to feel kind of awaken in a way. I think, unfortunately, we've sort of gone back to the basics, right? Brass tacks. And then now I think in light of all of those forces that I mentioned, and of course the rise, the acceleration of AI, and really, frankly, the financial incentives and the greed and the I think the longing for power that is driving it, I think we're at a moment where it's hard to see or envision an alternative to that and where that will bring us. But all that being said, I feel like, and this is also why I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm excited about it. And I feel like whenever times are really dark, and maybe this is the darkest I've seen, that we maybe all have seen, at least members of my generation, I feel like there is this optimist in me where I feel like, well, this can't be it. Like, I mean, this is almost like too profane, too trivial to be the end game. I mean, is this really it? And I don't think it is. And I think in a way, as we're hitting rock bottom and business is sort of very disenchanted and so brutally transactional, it's exactly the time at which we can and have to imagine something different. And I see first signs of that. I mean, there's a lot of efforts underway. Hopefully the House of Beautiful Business, my organization, our community is contributing modestly to that as well. But that's the hope that I feel like No, now there needs to be a counter narrative. There needs to be a new structure. And I think it will happen.
Yeah, there's in a lot of ways through these conversations of season one, at least, and having you now on the show as well. It's really interesting because I see it very similarly. This situation, per moment in time currently, is really forcing us as humans to look at the tension within us, right? On the one end, it's this very fear-driven reactionism, the idea of maybe having capitalism and these power grabs sort of as coping mechanisms. But on the other hand, our amazing ability to imagine better, more just, more morally aligned, more humane ways of living. And it is interesting how technology, the political, the business side, and the very human side are all kind of in this extreme tension. The question now is, how do we navigate out of that? So, as you mentioned, you've founded the House of Beautiful Business, which is a community, it's a platform, it publishes a lot of really great writing and thinking that's very thought provoking in many ways. I wanted to ask you, what makes a business beautiful in the first place?
So this is a question we always try to evade. Because we believe one of the things that make a business beautiful is that there is no definitive beauty code. There isn't a catalog of criteria that, sort of a checkbox and you check and it's like, okay, now I have a beautiful business. I would say there's this, obviously this line by Dostoevsky, beauty can save the world. Then Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese poet, once said, beauty is what does not exist. So as if to say, it's something we have to project into it. And it's something we actually actively have to create. So beauty is everything that business is not right now. That business as usual is not right now. That's sort of the negative space, as the romantics would call it, the negative capability that we need to nurture. I mean, I would say beautiful is what is unexpected, surprising, playful, imaginative, anything that gives us a sense of something that is greater than just a transactional element or just the here and now or just something that we can empirically explain. So there's a moment of transcendence in there, right? That we published something about awe. We were very interested in the creation of awe at our gatherings and what some of the design principles are for the creation of awe. So that's a moment, right, of beauty. I was just told at a roundtable that I attended that there's research that most people go to churches, for example, not because they want to participate in the mass or they want to practice or pray, but actually just because they want to experience awe. So they want to see themselves in relation to something that is greater than themselves, right? Sort of a force, whether they're religious or at least organized religious or not. There's this moment of awe. And so beauty is when something happens to us, when we create something that in a way is not the expected outcome of something that we've engineered, I would say. And then, of course, the purpose and sustainable long-term thinking, social justice, ethics, empathy, all of these things, of course, also are contributing to the fabric of a beautiful business. But I would say at the end of the day, it's what makes sort of great art. It's idiosyncratic, it's unique. It's like walking into a room and just like, whoa, what? And and it's a moment, it's a revelation, I would say, and a moment of where you actively participate in meaning making. So I know that's not a very satisfying definitive answer, but it's an inquiry rather than an answer for us. And that's why we're still in business.
Which I love, because I think, in a lot of ways, and the reason I asked the question is to kind of pull out a little bit. A lot of the work that you're doing is, as you mentioned earlier, counter narrative, but almost more than a counter narrative, it's really teaching new and different skills. Because typically when we think business, we always think about the idea of a business basically from that was born with the Industrial Revolution. It's predictable, it's measurable, it's safe in that sense, right? Like, it's reproducible. But what you're pointing to is we need to look in ourselves and connect deeper with ourselves, and then with society, or maybe humanity as a whole, and even just first and foremost connect with our emotions to feel a sense of awe, to feel a sense of, this is bigger than myself, this is bigger than my paycheck, this is bigger than the shareholder value we create, because ultimately there is a bigger purpose for this thing that we then call a business, which is very much so counter to the dominant way of how the world operates. But I think because of that, probably highly relevant. Switching gears just a little bit, because you mentioned your two books earlier already, and I was trying to see if actually the Tyranny of the Winners was already translated. I thought, aside from the title being exceptional, I think that both of your books, The Business Romantic, which was published, I believe, in 2015, and then Tyranny of Winners in 2020. So these books, to me, always feel like they're ahead of the curve and at the same time so current. So as we already discussed, you're advocating in the work that you're doing, the platform you're creating, for a different way of doing business, from the understanding of the business romantic all the way to maybe we should not optimize for winning, which is all very counter to like the Jack Welch's, of the world and all of that. So talk to me a little bit about what drives that, and maybe a little bit deeper into kind of what are we optimizing for then, if not the maximalist capitalistic gain.
So both books have in common that they were, in a way, contrarian to mainstream thinking and mainstream paradigms. And I really I'm a language person. So I like the friction that comes from juxtaposing two terms. Like romance and business seemed like completely diametrically at odds. Like, how does that work? And it really was, it really provoked everybody who sort of heard about it. And the same with winning, to actually declare the end of winning or write a book about, I think the subtitle was how we can learn to lose, how we can lose without being losers. Against the tyranny of the winners. And I was very interested in, I guess, kind of breaking the paradigm of like winning by all means and winning is the only paradigm. So the first book, I think, was a rallying cry against optimization, and the second book was a rallying cry against winning. Two of what I would call false gods of modern management and business. The third one maybe is, and it kind of connects the two, is efficiency, which can also, of course, be very, very valuable, but it can also be very cancerous and become, if we're fixated, if we're obsessed with it, it become very damaging. And optimizing is, I think, in a way, like I don't really want to optimize for anything. I want to maximize as a romantic, right? I want to maximize the meaning. I want to maximize the sensation, the experience of something, but I don't necessarily want to optimize with a given amount of resources yielding the maximum outcome. In that sense, I'm not interested in efficiency. We have a line in what we call the tenets of beautiful business, sort of our original manifesto, that says, don't waste time with efficiency. The things that really matter in life, they have nothing to do with efficiency, right? If you look back on your life, of which, by the way, you spent the majority of waking hours at work, efficiency will not matter that much. And so I think we must overcome that mindset that we have to optimize. It's not replacing one optimization target with another. It's just actually giving us license to play without an expected or engineered outcome. It's actually departing on a journey whose destination we don't know. It's actually asking questions for which we don't have answers. It's using business as a tool of investigation, of inquiry, of revelation, of learning, as a social arena rather than only a tool for producing outcomes. And I think the interesting thing, and this gives me hope right now, that we're witnessing currently is, of course, that the work that is considered efficient work that can be done efficiently will very likely be done more efficiently by machines and by AI. Whether you are a notary assistant or a researcher, a knowledge worker, a journalist, it might affect, of course, us too as well in our roles. Parts of our roles, if not our entire jobs, will be automated and done more efficiently. This is, of course, very threatening, and it can lead to devastation and at least a restructuring of the entire economy, as we know. But the one thing it can do is, I hope, is that it can give birth to a new economy that, in one way or another, needs to liberate itself, at least as long as it's human, from the dominance of efficiency, and actually think about, okay, like if we participate in an economy, in a society, then if it's not productivity based on efficiency, what is our contribution? And then I think we come back to the contribution is to feel more, to imagine more, to play more, to engage in relationships, to foster intimacy, to connect with one another, to not be lonely, to to serve as a medium for each other, to unlock the miracles of life for each other. So, we're moving then from an economy of efficiency to an economy of care and wonder. I mean, I know this sounds kind of woo-woo and lofty, but I believe that is probably going to happen, because in 10 years from now, God, 10 years seems like a long time, actually, but maybe even sooner, most of knowledge work will be eradicated.
Yeah.
I mean, already I read, this is so interesting, that ChatGPT or LLMs, generative AI, is used predominantly for writing and editing, which is I found really, really interesting. So it's meaning making, it's crafting meaning, it's language. And the language, of course, will change. It will affect us, how we think. We will become, if you will, agents of agentic AI. And so it will be very hard to maintain what we currently understand as human. It will evolve, but it is an opportunity for us to carve out a space that we can fill with our very unique human capacities. The only thing that's crucial, and I think this is a political fight, is to make sure that we still have political representation, even though we might not have the same amount of economic representation that we had in an industrial or in a digital pre-AI society. So I think that's the big shift we're seeing. And I think the big worry is, of course, is what Yanis Varoufakis calls digital feudalism.
Yes.
And sort of seeing a small elite of overlords running the show, and the rest of us serving as data feeds, essentially, living in a reality that is manufactured by synthetic creators and meaning makers. Okay, that was a very long answer to your
fantastic answer, and a lot of great jumping off points, especially because I just a few weeks ago gave a talk at NYU, guest lecture at NYU, and I titled the talk Age of Ingenuity. And basically, it was especially interesting because it was to a group of HR professionals in an MBA program. And it was fascinating as I was walking through essentially those changes, similar to what you're describing that we're observing, and kind of pulling in all the conversations that I'm having and the insights I'm gaining from people like you. It was interesting because there was you could sense a tension, and attention increased as the talk went on, because we talked about the Industrial Revolution, and as you mentioned, the productivity optimization levers and all of that. Walk through, okay, well, let's think this a little bit ahead, talk through what AI might mean, and then paint a picture that's different. How do we give people more of a sense of meaning, sense of dignity in their work, right? How do we unlock human ingenuity? How do we connect more with each other? And what was interesting was, on a human level, that absolutely connected. And at the same time, people were so conditioned to think within the boundaries of the traditional, which knob do I need to press? Well, how do I then also measure ingenuity? Right. And giving people the space to be human and maximize the ingenuity, that I walked away actually probably with more learnings than I left there, because it brought exactly this thinking to the forefront for me as well. Okay, well, how do we lead into a world that is not that doom and gloom, digital overlords, and people become essentially just fodder for the AI machine? So maybe jumping off from that, you did about, I think, half a year ago, or maybe it was a little longer, a series of events and talks on the bigger umbrella headline of the poly opportunity, which I believe was your response to what people either call the poly crisis or meta crisis. And I think it ties nicely into what we just kind of touched on. If we are just generally in agreement that there is a meta crisis, a poly crisis at work, and we're in the middle of it, right? But we have the hope that we can navigate out of it. What is the poly opportunity, or how do we actually turn what we're currently facing into opportunities that ensure that humans, really as humans, will thrive in the future?
So the poly opportunity, exactly as you said, was a response to the poly crisis. So this idea that a number of crises are mutually compounding. They intersect: climate, mental health, financial crisis, geopolitical instability, and so forth. And our idea was, well, let's flip the narrative. What if we actually examine trends such as, I don't know, feminism, cryptocurrency, I mean, with all of its flaws, but also as a potential force for good, decentralized governments, renewed democracy, inclusion, heightened collective consciousness, the renewal or reinvigoration of spirituality. So there are a number of trends of which we thought they are inherently at least conducive to shaping a new world that is more beautiful than the current one. So we were interested in the intersections. What if we actually examined how they might amplify one another? And it was, at the end of the day, it was an effort to produce hope, which is really the main business that we're in. It's to produce courage and hope. And we hosted 4 events across 4 continents, if you count in the one boat ride to the Asian side of Istanbul.
Yes.
But it was in Tangier, Morocco, New York, and Berlin. And then we had a number of online series, and we published a lot in between. We were hoping to build a sense of community and build courage. And then we published, at the end of it, we published 20 opportunities, like 20 outcomes or conclusions, or actually they're more prompts or provocations. So it was a almost year-long conversation, grounded in where we came from and hopefully leading to something else. And I believe that the key to, you ask, like, how do we thrive as humans in the future? I fundamentally believe that I'm very opposed to any form of nostalgia, which might surprise you because I wrote a book about romanticism, and it sounds like kind of hearkening back to these oldies but goodies. And I don't think that we can save liberal democracy and social market society and democracy and the way we connected with each other and the way we ran our societies. There's no going back. I think our reality is fundamentally changing, or I think Jonathan Taplin wrote this book, The End of Reality. The experience of reality is changing, is eroding. There isn't a shared reality anymore. And partly our reality will be synthetic, right? It will be made of synthetic characters, fake videos, constant simulation, constant persuasion. We're already seeing this. The Chan-Weng Chu, which is, by the way, also a fake author of the book Hypnocracy, calls it hypnocracy as the governance of our time, which I think, even though it was a fake author, it was written by an Italian journalist with AI. But the term hypnocracy is a really good one. So what we need to do, I think, is to carve out a new space. So it's not about protecting or preserving what makes us human. I don't even know what that is, to be honest. And I don't think anything is exclusive to us humans. I really think, maybe except for some physical sensations, and, well, you can debate whether or not AI is or can be sentient or conscious. That's a whole other kind of rabbit hole. But there is really literally nothing that is exclusive to us, in my opinion. So I think that's quite myopic to think. And if there is, it won't matter because we won't remember it. It will be overwritten. So what is interesting about this moment is that we need to think about how to pair ourselves, how to coexist with AI, and just redefine what it means to be. I have no idea what that means, but I feel like the discussion about beauty and intimacy and imagination has the right access point. And I remember this beautiful quote by Douglas Rushkoff, the digital theorist who spoke at one of our events in New York, who said, underneath all of this reality is an ocean of tears, and we're so afraid to touch it. So there is there's goosebumps and tenderness and this sort of recognition sometimes of like, oh, I see you, you're a fellow human. It's that.
Yeah.
It's whatever it takes to get us there. It's almost Buddhist understanding, or seeing yourself in the other. Whatever it takes to do that, I think that's, frankly speaking, that's the most powerful tool and door to this new humanity, much more potent than any theoretical frameworks or any philosophical ruminations.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because I'm with you on the nostalgia part. And then when I go further back, or I have more of these conversations, there is a lot of alignment with some of the very traditional ancient Far Eastern philosophies, right? Because at the end of the day, I think, enjoying a good meal that was carefully made with a few people that, love, or that you share, connection with is deeply nourishing for us as humans in a way that we have a hard time, really expressing. That's where the art comes in, right? That's where poetry comes in. And if we also see ourselves in the larger context of just being one with the world that we live in, then there are things that make us uniquely human and that we had discovered a long time ago. And then for some reason, over the course of millennia, probably, have kind of took a different path. And it seems like some of that awareness is coming back. And maybe that's what you're describing in terms of cultivation going forward, or cultivation of a space might be something more along those lines, so long as we can actually figure out how to keep societies intact and how to keep us moving as a collective. Because I think on an individual level, you could potentially even practice a lot of this, but that does not mean that we are able to collectively get ourselves there as a species, or as one species within a lot of other species.
I think that's true. I would also, though, distinguish between human and humanist. So, I don't think the future of business will be human. I don't think we will play a huge role. I just don't see it. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's fine. That's maybe an act of liberation. So we can do other things. And maybe our role is to actually simply parent and train AI, which will then basically, precede us, and we will move on to do other things. And maybe that's just fine. I think we're also quite attached, of course, to our own species. I mean, of course, I am as well.
Yeah.
I love humanist values. I think humanist values, and this is, of course, also a biased view, but I think they're vital for the peaceful coexistence and flourishing of any society, whether it's AI human or human. That's why I'm so interested in humanist values. I think we need to feed AI with them, because otherwise it doesn't look like a future that will be beautiful. But I'm not necessarily believing that the future will be or the future of business will be human. I was just talking to an AI scientist the other day who works for a big advertising conglomerate with a mandate to almost like disrupt themselves. And what he was telling me is seems like one likely outcome of all the acceleration of AI is that we will have agents. There is this term called amorphous AI or plastic AI that are so the notion of plasticity, that are so tuned to us that they can completely emulate us, that they basically predict what we want before we even know we want it. They will be our digital twins. If that is the case, though, we actually will no longer need to go shopping. We will no longer have desires. We will not need brands who serve as arbiters and translate between a product and our desires, or sort of fake desires or fabricated desires very often, which advertising, of course, has created. So there might just be a agent-to-agent marketplace trading services and goods that at some point we might not even need. There might be an abundance of that. So we might actually not really want anything anymore. We might not purchase anything anymore except for what is absolutely essential. So I think all of the market mechanics will at least change dramatically or become obsolete in the way we see them now. And again, then what is the outcome? What's the implication? We potentially maybe universal basic income, what many people advocate. I also really like the idea, and I don't really see another viable alternative to redistributing all of the dividends or the gains that come from automation. Maybe we live in communal societies, or we actually have more of kin-based societies, more nuclear families again. Maybe we live in communes that are focused on creativity or spiritual practices. But the role of work as a function of integrating us into society and giving us meaning and identity, I think will dramatically change, which is also why I feel so much of the business school education and the way we train young leaders, upcoming leaders, is so completely out of sync with the reality that they're basically growing into. It's also very hard to change the paradigm in flight, of course. I know that. But I look at like 5 years and I was like, oh my God, like almost nothing they're learning at school will actually still be helpful or be in demand.
Yeah. I want to, before we get to the education part, because I have a question for you on that specifically, given, that I work with students at Princeton, and this is part of, me doing my own learning here and hoping, hopefully can contribute a little bit to them walking into the world that they'll inherit to make it better. But one thing that sounds really interesting in what you said is around this idea of, we don't need work anymore to find meaning. And at the same time, we don't have to go shopping anymore. We don't have to do, a lot of things technically if we think that all the way through. How do you think about dignity or the agency, which I believe you also wrote about, as part of a really important part of the human condition, essentially? Because what I could also see is that, okay, if we don't have to do all of this, right? Like those emotional, internal, mental muscles will all atrophy. And, where does that leave us?
And there is, as you know, right, there is already the study, MIT published something
Exactly.
a few
Yes.
months ago, essentially investigating how the increased use of generative AI leads to diminishing critical
Mm-hmm.
reasoning skills, critical thinking skills, which is, of course, very concerning. And there's also a study that showed that actually students are struggling with essay writing. It's
Yes.
writing coherent text without digital aid has become, it seems like, a really daunting task. It's a social construct, though, right? That we equate agency with dignity. I mean, if you look at history, when did we have agency? I mean, mostly lived in non-democratic regimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty modern invention, or construct at least, that we equate agency with, I think, thriving or dignity in a way. Now, in an age of social media, or in a digital society, I think the question is, I mean, how much agency actually do we have? We're constantly being manipulated. We're constantly being persuaded.
Yeah.
They're in our brain, those
Mm-hmm.
platforms, right? We are addicted. They're fracking our attention,
Yes.
as D. Graham Burnett calls it, the attention researcher. And the question is, like, is it a lost cause, or how do we protect the limited agency that we have? So I'm saying this because I'm not sure whether agency is the right indicator of dignity. It may be a part of it, but I feel like I'm not sure if we have a chance to really achieve sovereignty anymore, like with AI.
Interesting.
I think that is probably gone. And again, maybe that has been a myth or an illusion from the beginning, and we never had that in the way we lived. We were so easily manipulated and
Mm-hmm.
so conditioned by so many factors. I mean, whether that's genetics or experiences or power structures, stereotypes, societal expectations. So the agency, I feel like, is pretty limited anyway in a capitalist society. It's more about how we use that, right? How we use the remaining space, the autonomous space that we have, or how we can find dignity as we are being confronted with agents or agentic AI. How do we deal with it? How can we find dignity even though we know we are in a relationship of dependency, and that is maybe not equal in terms of power? So we're not as powerful as AI.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry to say, at the moment I said it, I'm like, wow, it feels really shocking to say it out loud, but we're probably not. It's too late. And I think it's now what's left to do is to sort of explore what are the spaces, the experiences, the rituals, the relationships that we can cultivate to at least have a sense of dignity. And it means probably that we have creativity. I think that's maybe
Mm-hmm.
more important than agency. It's the ability to, well, maybe there is, of course, agency is needed to have creativity, but to make meaning out of the most miserable circumstances or adversarial circumstances, and to create, to create art, to create beauty, to create. I think maybe that is, at the end of the day, I think where the future of work will lead us. I think I wrote in an essay, I think a couple of years ago, I wrote that ultimately the only work that will be one that gives us dignity is the work that we will do for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yes.
essentially the work of an artist.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's frankly the one thing where, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and when I think about, the future that she will live in, and we briefly touched on, we'll talk a little bit about it more in a second. We talk about how do we prepare our young people for the world that they're going to go into. I highly encourage any sort of artistic creative endeavor, of just self-expression, because it also allows you to connect with yourselves. Like going back to the very beginning of where you talked about, we need to connect with a sense of awe and wonder and our emotions that bring all of that, you know together. I think that's probably going to be one of the most important things to teach, which, to your point earlier, our education system does the exact opposite, pretty much for the last 100 years at least. So
Yeah.
that's a really important, I think, connection to make. And probably a great segue into my next question. You already briefly touched on your upcoming book, and you also officially now announced it on LinkedIn. At least the working title currently is Supercuration. It was very surprising to me because I've seen you, of course, write about curation. You even, I think, describe yourself as a curator. It has immediate connection to the art world. Tell me about why you describe the ability to curate as superpower and why you think that's going to be a critical skill to build in this future that you just described.
Yeah, I mean, curation has been so overused, right? So on the one hand, it's strange. It's on the one hand, it's this elitist term that we ascribe to people like Hans-Ulrich Obrist and other jet-setting impresarios and their amazing work, right? But it's a very exclusive circle.
Yeah.
And, like it's the tastemakers and the ones who are in the know. And then on the other hand, it's been really democratized, and everybody under the sun who has a social media feed or is collecting something is a curator, right? So many people call themselves curator now. And yet I do believe that it's a really important concept, and it comes from the Latin curare, so actually taking care of. And the first curators in Rome were maintained, the aqueducts and infrastructure. So they were just maintainers. They took care of things. And I thought that was really interesting. So I want to invoke that notion that curation means taking care of something. And in my field in particular, it means to take care of ideas. Like you take care of an idea, you put ideas in relationship with one another, you bring people and ideas together, but you do it in a way that honors the attention of the recipient, of the audience, honors the integrity and the intention of the artist or the ideas person, and in a way builds a world, right? It builds a new world. And it is so important because, first of all, we're sort of inundated with information, and there's this onslaught of data. And so discernment, the ability to select what really matters from a flood of information and present that to others on your team, to your friends, to people in your social circles, is kind of what gives us, it's a meaning-making act. And it bestows identity on us and meaning on a social gathering. So it's distilling something into what is essential, seeing something in something, that's, I think, a curatorial quality that will, going back to your question about dignity, maybe that can give us dignity. Yeah, I still see something. I'm still able to discern. I'm not absorbing 100% of what is thrown at me. I can still find my path through it, which is in a way one of the remaining possibilities of individuation, to remain an individual and not just be conformist with everything else. And so I think in that sense, I think it's really, really important. And I think the other element is really this element of care I think we will have to think about attention, because that is such a big currency of our time. Like, what generates attention? How do you regenerate attention? How do you honor attention? What actually gets attention? That's all, I think, a curatorial mindset. And then the other political question, of course, is always, I said it in this article that you read, curation is a say no, and then if you say yes, it's a hell yes. So you have to decide, which is why I write about a bouncer in a techno club. It's the act of benevolent exclusion. So who's not in? Who do you not let in? What information do you exclude for the whole thing to be still meaningful? And then if you commit to an idea, how do you present it with such conviction and maybe in enough context for it to really resonate? And I like this term resonate in a sense of what the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa described in his book Resonance, right? Really as a physical vibration where something sort of gets attuned and vibrates, and it doesn't even have to be like of utility, or it doesn't have to be consonant. It actually can be dissonant, right? But you understand that, something is set in motion and it vibrates. I think those are all moments of inspiration. And I think, and now bringing this back to the business leaders in the future, if they manage teams that are partly AI, partly human, hopefully, the main thing for them is they have to be storytellers. They have to be poets and thinkers. They have to inspire. They have to make people fall in love with an idea. They have to provide context. They have to discern what matters truly, right? And I think those are all curatorial practices that if we understand curation, we can hone them. One last thing about curation that's also important is, so far I talked about the curator, right? And the active of curation. But I think what is equally important is to develop curatorial literacy. How
Mm-hmm.
are things curated for us? Because it is a power tool, of course. How do
Yes.
algorithmic feeds curate for us? How do others, curators, people like myself, why do I curate? And how am I being manipulated by the curation that others put in front of us? So I think curatorial literacy will help us maintain some sovereignty, some dignity, and help us understand how meaning is made and contribute to the making of meaning in a way that is, yeah, that gives us maybe some dignity, to use the term that you used earlier.
Yeah. There's a lot in there that I can that actually resonates, and I love the term as much as you do for the same reasons that resonates with me. I think from a leadership perspective, what you described, this is so interesting because there's care, right, on the one hand, and that's maybe why you curate. You care about the things that you do pick out, maybe the people you share it with, all of that, and that from a leadership perspective, I think is obviously highly relevant. And then the other part that you're pointing out, which I've been, especially coming out of the tech industry and kind of intentionally stepping out of it over the last few years, think a lot about this debate currently about taste in the context of anything we produce, from the software to, and I've always had a real problem with that because as a designer, on the one hand, I can nod my head, but as I've been diving deeper into, for example, specifically taste and what it means, and really just an expression of the elite ruling class at the time, that's problematic in a lot of ways because, as you said, with the bounce example, it leads typically to exclusion. So how do you think that super curation, which my understanding of it would be that because we live in this attention economy and we're flooded with stuff, the curation happens both on a macro and on a micro level. How do we balance these things? You already touched a little bit on literacy, but how do we balance it as leaders specifically, right? Level of care, this topic of taste as an expression of the ruling class of what's acceptable, and inclusion. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, without doubt, right? Taste has been politicized and has been used as a tool to distinguish between classes and to divide and exert power. But at the same time, the development of taste, I mean, so essentially knowing what one likes, like develop a set of preferences, is really also, I think, a way of humanization, right? So if you don't like anything and you don't have any passion for anything and you don't like, the chicken curry more than the schnitzel, or the Picasso more than the Miro, then it's very hard in a way to develop what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called cultural capital or social capital. And it is, not wanting to sound elitist, but of course developing these preferences or rooting for this football club versus another football club, it's what makes you who you are. It allows you to be a fan. It allows you to be devoted to something that you like, and not just because it's convenient through a click. It is actually something where you invest time, you experience it, and then you like it so much that yes, you want to do it again. And the moment you do it again, it's becoming a taste. So it's a ritual, and in that sense, I don't only see it as something politicized or something that's used in a divisive way, but it's actually almost like an act of emancipation. Sentimental education, like actually training our heart and our emotional, spiritual faculties, is all about discernment and developing, in a way, tastes, knowing what you don't like, much even more so perhaps than what you like. And that makes you I would say well, not coherent, that's the wrong word, but a person that is complex and can acknowledge complexity, can live in complexity. So in that sense, I want us all to develop more taste. I want more tastemakers. I want everybody to be a tastemaker.
Yeah.
I want the world full of taste. I don't see it quite so negatively. And I think more people should curate. If more people think about the playlist they put together for their loved one, great.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And it goes back to, I think having these conversations, understanding the nuances, because we have these big terms and they can be weaponized one way or another, conceptually, in reality, in the way we apply them, and then making a discerned effort. And I love this the focus on care, to care for yourself and care for others around you, which is probably a great way for us to kind of wrap up with one last question around the future of leadership. If you had to, from all the conversations you've had with, traditional business leaders that you meet and consult, the political leaders, and then think about the future that we've now, really in a lot of ways looked from different angles at, what are the kind of 2-3 qualities? I don't even want to call them skills, because I think that's also more like an old worldy term. But what are the 3 qualities that young people specifically, but more broadly, maybe people that lead businesses and people in those businesses in the future, what are those qualities that we need to cultivate?
Love. It's what Gianpiero Pettlieri, who is a member of our community, is an INSEAD professor. He just spoke at, I believe it was the Nordic Business Summit, and I saw it on LinkedIn, and essentially that what he has been saying, and all of his writing is about love and leadership, really. They need to care, and they need to love what they do. They need to love their team. They need to show that they love something, And if you don't have that quality, I think it'll be soulless and transactional, and it will ultimately not inspire or lead anybody. I think the other thing I would say is I recently interviewed I had mentioned him before, I believe, Shukei Matsumoto, who just wrote this book, Work Like a Monk. He's a Buddhist monk. And I asked him, I said, he will be a speaker at our event next year in Athens, the World Beautiful Business Forum. And I said, oops, a fly. This will not work on the podcast if you don't watch the video of the fly. He said, I asked him, I said, have you been to Athens? And he said, no, I've never been. I'm super excited. And I said, oh, what is the first thing you will do? And then he said, well, I will go to your venue. It's the Maria Callas Theater. And I will clean the floor. Because that's, as a Buddhist monk, that's the first thing I do in order to actually give to the space and not just extract and understand where I am. I mean, that's not a question for me. That's the first thing I would do. So I thought that was such a beautiful thing to say in the spirit of caring and sort of servant leadership. And I think the last thing I would say is leaders in the future, they're world builders, right? So I think they will have to probably write roles or characters for AI agents. So then they almost need to think like a novelist. They need to create experiences for their workforce, their designers, poets, thinkers. I mean, I think your line of questioning and your podcast could not be timelier, right? This is exactly, I think, equality, like understanding ambiguity, that is not black or white, binary, thinking, really thinking with others, independently and with others, not always accepting what is the majority, being the lone voice in the room, even if it's lonely, that's leadership more so than ever. And I hope that we sort of train professionals to practice that rather than just jumping on the next bandwagon.
On that note, I don't even want to add anything. Tim, this was an absolute delight. I could continue for another few hours, but you have places to go to, and I really appreciate we got this time in. So thank you so much, Tim. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's incredible. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for this week's show. Thank you for listening to Poets and Thinkers. If you like this episode, make sure you hit follow and subscribe to get the latest episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts.